Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening to you all. I recognise a number of the names in the participant list, and we have people from all over the world here. So thank you for joining this webinar on the MLC's bulk database feed. Today's agenda will start with introductions to the people that will be presenting today and assisting. We'll then talk a little bit about the background of the MLC's bulk database feed. My colleague Raphael will then walk you through a bit of a technical overview of that. Then we'll talk a little bit about the availability of the feed and the timing and the pricing of that. And then finally, we can move towards questions. I think we'll have a good amount of time for questions at the end. This is not a long presentation. So hopefully lots of time to get your questions answered. But on the topic of agenda, I do just want to clarify what we mean when we talk about the MLC's bulk database feed, because I know from some feedback we got that perhaps this wasn't crystal clear to everybody. So what we are going to be talking about today is the requirement in the law that the MMA law, that the MLC make its database of musical works information available in a bulk machine readable format, a computer readable format. So today's session is going to be somewhat technical in nature at times. Yes, so I think our target audience is going to be people that are generally interested in sort of operational things, technical things, administrative things, as it relates to sort of bulk data. And just to emphasize then what we're not talking about today, we are also shortly going to make our database of musical works available to the public in a web browser. So in a web interface that you can use on your phone or on your desktop or laptop. And you will be able to search the MLC's database and look up work information in the MLC's database via a web browser. Many of you will know ASCAP and BMI, for example, offer similar functionality. But I just want to emphasize that is not the topic of today's webinar. That is not what we're going to be talking about. And similarly, we're also not here to talk about the MLC's member portal today. If you are after further information on the MLC's member portal, you can find it on that URL there. We have done a number of demonstrations and Q&As and webinars on the portal over the last 2 or 3 months. In particular, if you go to that resources link, there was a walkthrough of the portal done during MLC week in November. And if you're after further information on the MLC's member portal, that is probably the best place for you to go. So I'm just saying all of that so as not to disappoint anybody that is here, because they think we're either going to be talking about the web browser access or access to the member portal. So yes, this is very much about the sort of bulk computer readable data that we are making available. So with that clarified, I will just move on to some quick introductions. My name is Richard Thompson. I'm the CAO of the MLC, and I've been working on this for nearly 2 years at this point. Joining me today and sort of presenting the more technical content in the middle of today's presentation will be my colleague Raphael, who is his title is MLC Technical Consultant, just all-round technical whiz, working with us on a number of different initiatives, including this and the DQI and lots of other bits and pieces. And then also ably assisting us, particularly with the questions in the Q&A section of Zoom, is Serena Elton, who is our head of educational partnerships. And just while I mention the Q&A, please do feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A section rather than in the chat. That is the better place for them to go, because we can sort of work through them much more easily in the Q&A section than we can in the chat. And I'd also say we very much want to get to questions on the public database feed as far as is possible, rather than other MLC topics. So to that end, we will sort of prioritize answering questions that are about today's webinar, rather than more sort of general questions on other MLC topics. Which isn't to say we won't answer them, but we will try and prioritize questions that are on today's webinar. Just one other quick note. You know, we've spent considerable time and effort making sure that the information that we're going to share with you today is accurate. There are just sort of two quick caveats to that. The first being that we are actually sort of still in the final stages of testing of this feed. So there is always a chance that there are some sort of last-minute changes that we were not expecting. So, you know, please bear in mind the information is given, you know, in good faith, but there is a chance of some I would think minor changes at this point, but that is also possible. And similarly, we are waiting for the US Copyright Office to promulgate rules that may impact the work that we are doing. So again, we are working from the best understanding we have of the sort of provisional rules that the Copyright Office has put forward. But again, there is a chance of us needing to make a last-minute adjustment to the work that we're doing when the Copyright Office publishes those rules. So, with all of that preamble hopefully now out of the way, let's dive into the content proper. So, as I said 3 or 4 minutes ago, the MMA statute requires that the MLC make its database of musical works available in, and I quote, a bulk machine-readable format through a widely available software application. To the engineer in me, that isn't crystal clear, but what we believe and you know, having spoken to the people that crafted the language, we believe the intent of that is best met via 2 different approaches. The first is a bulk data dump of the contents of the MLC's musical works database, and that is the topic that we are going to be focusing on today. Additionally, next year, we are going to begin working on an API to access the data. So we're not going to touch on that particularly today because we haven't particularly started that process of figuring out what the API should be and how it should look and how it should work. So yeah, we're going to focus on the data dump format today. And I think it might be helpful to clarify what is meant by the musical works database. And what is the data set that is in there that we are going to be making available. So firstly, data on musical works. Hopefully that sort of bullet point is self-explanatory. Data on parties, and I would say generally speaking, parties fall into 2 categories. That is the creators of musical works, songwriters, and then let's say representatives of musical works. So whether that be music publishers or administrators or CMOs or other representatives of musical works will fall into the sort of category of parties. We then will also be making available such data as we have on sound recordings and how those sound recordings link to the musical work. I.e., this is a sound recording of this musical work, and then finally, such data as we have on products or releases, depending on which terminology you prefer, and again, which sound recordings are present on those products. What is not included is any sort of payment information. So obviously things like bank details, royalties, payments made. So when we talk about the musical works database, we are talking about sort of the data on catalog, on repertoire, rather than anything that might be sort of deemed confidential like payment data. And happy to provide further clarification on that via the Q&A if anybody has any questions on that. So, as I say, we had this requirement in the statute that the data needs to be made, generally available to pretty much anybody that wants it. How have we gone about fulfilling that requirement? So over 12 months ago now, we approached DDEX, an organization that we worked with for some time, and it sort of went through the collaborative process that DDEX goes through to develop technical standards. And sort of starting, as I say, last November and for the last 12 months or so, the DDEX licensing working group has worked through the process of sort of gathering requirements, designing, and then sort of specifying a new standard to capture this information. And the purpose of doing it, or one of the key purposes and main reasons for doing it via DDEX, is that it's a very collaborative organization, but it's also an organization that has very broad representation across the entire music ecosystem. So as the slide says, I think by my count, over 30 different organizations have fed into the development of the standard. Obviously, the MLC was one of those, but it also included a number of music publishers, other collective management organizations, record labels, metadata companies, interested individuals, just sort of lots of people all pulling in the same direction to try to develop the very best standard that we can for publishing this data. So that process was finalized in the last sort of month or so, and the new standard that DDEX have developed is called BWARM, Bulk Work and Recordings Metadata, and it's just worth noting it sits very well alongside a number of other DDEX standards, particularly those developed by the licensing working group. There's a standard called MWN in particular that it sits is very complementary to, so sort of fits alongside the rest of the DDEX standards, and utilizes and borrows from them quite heavily where it is appropriate to do so. And with that, I will hand you over to Raf, who will give a high-ish level overview of the BWARM standard.
Thanks, Rich. So, as hopefully all of you are very familiar, the data that surrounds our ecosystem is very well defined. It's got all sorts of relationships, and so that's why when we looked at the format, how we were going to format that database, we looked at what existed already and thought relational database made sense. So what we're going to look at is very much a lightweight database schema. What that means is that all the data is separated into tables. Those tables are made up of files, and everything is interlinked by IDs, so that are usually called primary keys, foreign keys. In the BWARM format, we've got 12 tables, so 12 files. And so, as I said, each table is a separate file. All in all, we have 112 database fields, so that's a lot of data points. And just to reassure you, we're not going to go through them in details today. You can have a look at the specifications for that, which will be communicated later on. And to keep things simple, all the data files are in TSV format. TSV stands for tab separated values. And on the right-hand side, you've got the actual diagram that represents all the tables and all the relationships between the tables. It may look a bit daunting, but we're going to go through it in a bit more details. Next slide, please, Rich. So the first section of the diagram represents all things parties. So parties are individuals or organizations that are involved in the creation of a musical work or the representation of rights in a musical work. So we're typically talking about songwriters, obviously, they're the essential component of work creation, publishers, administrators, CMOs, that all participate in representing and collecting, distributing the rights associated with musical works. So not wanting to go into too much details, all the essential fields are included in that table. Party names, obviously, party identifiers, and we've tried to be as broad as possible. So it includes IPI numbers, ISNIs, etc. And also contact information to be able to identify who the parties are. This is a mandated requirement. And as you can see, parties are interlinked to pretty much all parts of the schema. It's a very core component of the schema. So we'll see it repeated a few times throughout. So next section is obviously relating to musical works. Again, another core component of a musical work database. Information include work titles and alternative titles as well. All sorts of work identifiers, which are really key to the work that the MLC is doing. So MLC song code, obviously, but also ISWCs, which is the international standard code for work. Proprietary identifiers, if we have them, etc., etc. So identifiers is very much an essential part of that database. And then going a bit deeper into the data, we also have work shares, so the portion that each party represents in the work, that is the percentage, and their roles in the work. So if they are, for example, a composer, a lyricist, publisher, administrator, etc., etc. Next slide, please. So the next part of the database, which is also quite important, is recordings data. The data included is also fairly standard, so recording titles, obviously, display artists, which are the artist that recorded the title, the featured artist, essentially. And again, recording identifiers, so ISRCs, which is the International Standard Recording Code, and property identifiers as well. And most importantly, there is a representation of the link between the musical work and the sound recording. This is the really key component that links everything together. Next slide, please, Rich. Oh, sorry, thank you. So next component in the schema is all about product or releases, which are commonly called album. An album is a type of release. So again, we've got fairly standard fields included, amongst other things, product title, display artist, and again, all sorts of product-related identifiers. So ICPN is the international code for products, but it's more commonly known as UPC, for example, or EAN, barcodes. All those are type of ICPNs, and we're also included property identifiers. Obviously, those products are linked to recordings. A product or a release is usually made of recordings, and we've got a table of links indicating the relationship between between recordings and releases. And finally, so up until now, we've looked at really the metadata forming a copyright database. as part of the Music Modernization Act, we are required also to publish unmatched recordings and unclaimed work shares. So in the course of the work that we do, we may not have the copyright data for a work relating to a recording that's been played on a service provider, on a music service provider's store. In a similar vein, we might also have partially claimed works where only a portion of the work has been claimed by the rights holder. So we are missing part of the share and we don't know who that share relates to. So we are publishing that information with all the information that we have relating to them. So fields that are included are the link to the work. That's where the work is known in the case of unclaimed work shares, for example. If the recording is fully known and fully populated, we will put a link to the sound recording. There are instances where we might not be able to fully populate the sound recording. So instead, there are fields in that particular table to indicate recording metadata, titles, display artist, etc., etc. Another important field is the percentage of the work that remains unclaimed. So it can be anything between 0 to close to 100% if only a small portion of the work is unclaimed. And finally, a prioritization indicator to help you, to help rights holders go through that list and prioritize the work based on a number of indicators. So obviously we've gone through it quite quickly. It was really a brief overview to give an idea of what the BWORM standard is for and the flavor and the ideas around that. The full specifications are available on the DDEX knowledge base at the link indicated on the screen. The documentation is usually very, very good, as you would expect from a standard body like DDEX, and quite easy to understand for people that are used to reading specifications. But obviously, if you have any questions around those specifications, you can always come and ask us. And I think that's it for the technical specifications.
Thank you, Raf, and I just want to put on thanks on record. Excuse me, my thanks to DDEX and the people that participated in the development of the standard for their great work and collaboration on getting this done in a relatively short period of time with a pretty fixed deadline that couldn't be moved. So thank you, DDEX, and thank you everybody that collaborated in the development of the standard. So moving on to talk about availability. The MMA law requires that we charge a fee, but a fee not to exceed the marginal cost to the MLC of providing the database to anybody that wants it. So I will talk in just 2 seconds about what that fee is. But I also note for any DSPs that we have with us, DSPs and their vendors are able to get the database free of charge. So that's easy for them. So in terms of that marginal cost basis, we have done some number crunching and where we are. So there will be a one-time setup fee of $100 US. And as part of that setup fee, you get access to download the database for 1 month. If you want ongoing and continued access to the database, then effectively you can sort of think of it as a subscription, and the price of that subscription will be $25 a month. You cancel at any time. You know, from the MLC's point of view, I emphasize that this is in no way, shape, or form intended to be a money-making exercise. these numbers are just very much designed to cover our marginal costs. And so, you know, hopefully everybody would agree that they're fairly low. You know, for that's approximately $300 a year for if you want ongoing and continued access to all of that data. So I say again, it isn't about trying to make money. That is not the purpose of this exercise. It is just to cover our costs. I will also note that I think it is quite likely that the pricing model for the API will be different. I don't know how yet, but I think it is reasonably likely that we will adopt a different model for the API when that comes at some point next year. And then so sort of in terms of how it works, essentially what we will be doing is taking a weekly snapshot of the data, and then that is what we will package up into the Beam-Warm format, the DDEX format that we've described, and then we will make that available for download via a login on an SFTP site. So, you know, whether you go for the one-off option or the ongoing option, what we will need to do is set you up with credentials and access to an SFTP site, and that is where you can go to download the entire database in the Beam-Warm format. We expect that those for the first snapshots should become available early in January. As I say, we're just finishing off sort of the final stages of testing and waiting for the Copyright Office's rule, so that's why I don't have a more definitive date right now. But early January is when we are targeting. It would be helpful to us if you think you are going to be interested in getting access to the bulk database, whether on a one-off basis or an ongoing basis, if you could go to that link, and there is a very simple form there that has, I think it's 5 fields asking for complicated information like your name and email address, just so that firstly, we can get a bit of a handle on how many people are likely to want access, just so that we can make sure that we are prepared at our end to make sure that we can handle that volume. But also what we will do as and when we go live is send you an email letting you know that we are ready to go and that the database is becoming available for download, and providing you with further information on how you can go through the sign up process proper. So let me say, this is an expression of interest only. It does not commit you to anything. It does not ask you for credit card details. It is just an expression of interest form, but as I say, it's helpful for us to understand sort of how many people are likely to come and ask to be set up. And I mentioned credit card. That will be the form of payment. Yeah, there will be just a form that you need to go through, ask you various bits of information, including your credit card details, and then I think we are expecting to, you know, bill that one-off fee up front, and then bill $25 a month if you choose the ongoing option. And that is the standing bit of the presentation. There were a few people that sent in questions ahead of the presentation, and the questions that were sort of relevant to the topic I have put on a couple of slides. So I will just go through these very quickly, and then we can turn to the Q&A that people have put into the Zoom. And I think at this point we have probably answered most of these questions, but let me just whiz through them. So, will this data set contain all rights holders and their percentage of ownership? The simple answer to that is yes. I would just note, I'm not sure I would use the word ownership. I would say sort of representation or collection, since that is what we focus on. So, you know, our database focuses on who we need to pay. So I would perhaps use the word collection rather than ownership, but I think that is what you meant. So the question in that case is an emphatic yes. Is there going to be any costs to publishers? I think I've answered that question a couple of slides ago, so I won't dwell on that. Do you have to be a member of the MLC to search the MLC database or purchase the bulk data feed? No. So both the online web form with the online web access and the bulk data feed that we have just described are both available to anybody and everybody that wants access, and that is a requirement of the law. So that is very simple. Do small publishers need to have access to this data feed? Is a slightly difficult question to answer without more context. I'm going to say, though, in the ordinary course of business, probably not. It is perfectly possible, I would say, to be a music publisher and not need access to this feed. But clearly, not every small publisher is the same, so it's hard to give a definitive answer on that. But I would say you will be able to do everything you need to be able to do with the MLC without access to this bulk data feed. And then in terms of the standing questions, just on the API, are there plans to make registration and querying available via the API? And do you have a general purpose API? As I say, we haven't yet really done very much work on the API. We have focused this year on the bulk data feed. So I think as we get into the new year, we will begin to think about what the best process for sort of consulting around and developing the API might be. So I'm sorry, we don't really, I don't know is the honest answer to that question yet. We just haven't got to it yet, but we will turn to it in the new year. So with that, I will, and we have 50 questions in the Q&A, so I apologize in advance if we don't get to them all. But I will do my best, and Raph and I will do our best. Let's sort of look at the top, and I might try and knock out some easier ones to begin with. So Mohammed asks, how large is the feed, and will there be incremental updates? Raph, do you know how large the feed is, presumably when zipped?
So I don't have it zipped, unfortunately, so I'm going to give a rather large number. So it's about 25 gig currently. That includes the unclaimed and unmatched, which are actually quite a large portion of the data because it's quite a broad data set. I suspect zipped, because it's mostly text, you would expect something in the region of 5 gig if we get a 90% compression rate, which is very likely. So reasonably manageable. It's not intended to be used in Excel, for example. That wouldn't work.
Yeah, good point. You're going to want to either import this into a relational database or throw it in AWS Athena, or yes, this is not something you're going to be opening in Excel. I don't think it is, that is not what it is designed for. It's designed for computer to computer communication. So yeah, as I say, database or Athena or lots of other choices. And then you also ask about incremental updates. No, the approach that we are taking at the moment is that each snapshot will stand on its own. So no, it will not work on an incremental basis. Each snapshot is a full snapshot of the database. There was actually a question I glanced at that, oh, here we go. William asks, effectively, can you pay for selective access to just some of the data files in the standard? No, sorry, William, you can't. We're trying to keep it easy, is the honest answer for that. So rather than have sort of selective access with selective pricing, no, it is just everything comes together for the pricing that we described earlier. So that's that one. Nilesh asks, how do you source this data? Is it via representatives and musical societies whom creators are members of? So there are, I would say, this answer is going to be a little bit general, because yeah, just by its nature is going to be a little bit general. So I think it's fair to say in terms of musical works, the data on musical works will come in from our members, typically music publishers or administrators or songwriters or international CMOs, as you say. So yeah, that is where the musical works data comes from. We also get some recording and product data from the same sources, but most of the recording and product data that we will get will come from DSPs. DSPs are providing us with monthly reports of all of the recordings that we used on their services. So, you know, I think it's fair to say that across the, you know, the US and across every service operating in the US, that is a lot of sound recordings. So that is where the vast majority of the sound recording data that we have comes from the DSPs. So two main sources, representatives of musical works, whether they be the writers themselves or their sort of authorized representatives, and then the DSPs. Let me look. FX asks, will the feed provider work ID be permanent or specific to one feed? Raf, I think that's probably a question for you.
Sure. So in this instance, the feed provider work ID will be the MLC song codes. Our song codes are persisting throughout, so they will be permanent. There might be edge cases where works are merged, where you might see them changing. We will keep them in the background. We will maintain those song IDs, but for 90% of the use cases, the work IDs will be permanent.
Thanks for that, FX. Michael asks about derivative works and US statutory terminations. That is a complicated topic, as I know Michael well knows. What I will say is that there are fields in the BWARM standard that support US statutory terminations. And Raf, am I correct in saying, this is off the top of my head, that effectively there's something like an identifier for a pre-terminated work and a post-terminated work or something? Can you recall?
It's something like that. Within the works dataset, within the works table, there is a way to indicate which is the pre-termination work. So you can follow the trail and see which one is the most recent one and which one was the original work, I guess.
Thanks, Raf. Vladimir asks, does the database support, I won't read out the whole question. Essentially, Vladimir is asking about composite works, as I read the question, i.e. a work that is made up of parts of other works, such as a medley or a mashup or a potpourri. The honest answer to that is right now, the MLC doesn't have great data on composite works. It is an area that we know needs improvement. And I think as and when we have been able to implement some improvements around composite works in the database, we will then, I dare say, go to DDEX and ask for them to add support to that into the BWARM standard, at which point obviously the public data feed will begin to contain that. But as we speak right now, we have pretty limited information on composite works. So the honest answer is they're not wonderfully well supported at the moment. Effectively, what you would see if you had a work C that consisted of parts of work A and parts of work B, you would see 3 entries in the database: work A, work B, and work C. But alas, at the moment, I don't think it is possible to associate works A and B with work C. But on the list of things to do for future. Vladimir also asks, does the database include only copyrighted works, also public domain works. The database will include public domain works. Danny asks, how will the bulk data availability / model / pricing be different for publishers looking for a snapshot of their catalog only rather than the entire database? I would say to Danny, that functionality will become available to you on the portal. I hope at some point in the first quarter of next year, and I emphasize the word hope. So that is something that is on our to-do list and reasonably high on the to-do list. So I think probably the bulk data might, depending on how urgently you want it, the bulk data might not be the best approach for you. If you can give us a little bit more time, we are furiously developing lots of things. And one of those is the ability for a member to download their own catalog via the MLC's portal. So apologies that isn't available today, but if you just bear with us, Danny, we will get there. Chris asks, what type of people / companies are you expecting to want access to this database? Lots, I think, is the short answer. So across all sectors of the industry, I have heard that people are interested in access: publishers, labels, other collective management organizations, the DSPs, metadata companies. I would say most organizations that are dealing with data at any sort of volume are likely to be interested, though obviously I can't definitively speak for those organizations. But as I say, 30 organizations participated in the development of the standard. That suggests to me that there is plenty of people out there that are interested in getting hold of the data. Ron asks, if you cancel and come back later, can you pick up where you left off? Yes, is the short answer. I think just providing we don't need to set you up all over again. So as I say, access will be via SFTP. So don't throw away your SFTP credentials, because if we have to set you up all over again, then we need to charge you the setup fee again. But yes, if you want to subscribe for a couple of months and then pause for 6 months, that's absolutely fine. We're not trying to tie people in any way or commit them to like a 12-month contract or anything like that. That's not the intent of what we're doing. Raf, one for you. For DSP, it may or may not be one for you actually. Maybe we need to take this one away. For DSPs with publishing arms, with an established SFTP with the MLC already, will we be able to use the same connection to grab the bulk data, or will we need to create another SFTP setup?
So if things work out as I want them to work out, you will only need one SFTP account. We're trying to make life as easy as possible for all users, whatever type of users they are, whether they're DSPs, publishers, CMOs, songwriters. So one account to fulfill all the needs is my aspiration, and hopefully we get there.
Dan asks, for educational purposes, should each professor request database access, or would it be better for the institution to acquire it? It's a little bit difficult to answer. I suspect that, yeah. Sirona, do you have any thoughts on that you would like to?
I do. You beat me to it. I was emailing him back. Generally speaking, most professors will not need a full download of the massive database, but if they felt they needed one, it's probably less work to have their IT department download it for professors to have access to it. But I was just making clear, for example, use in a classroom, there will be a publicly available database on our website that anybody could search. So typically a professor would not need to download the entire database, but they are welcome to, and they would probably want some IT assistance from their IT department.
Thank you, Sirona. A few people are asking sort of about the size of the data. Jay Gibson and a former colleague of mine, Rob. I don't know, actually, and I should have looked that up before we did the webinar. Raf, do you happen to know how many works or recordings there are?
No, I saw that same question, and I have to admit I haven't had a chance to look at it. So we've had our first snapshot produced earlier this week, and we're still working through loading amongst all the other things that we're trying to do. So we might be able to publish that information later on, hopefully before the database is published, maybe on our website or in one way or another. I should be able to have an answer soon.
Heather asks, can you please clarify, hang on, her question just scrolled up. Can you please clarify, are publishers / rights holders required to pay for data relating to unmatched works? No. So the data relating to unmatched works will also be available in your member portal, assuming you are an MLC member, where you will be able to search it and, if appropriate, make a claim against it. So if you searched the unclaimed or unmatched and found a work that you thought you represented, you would then be able to sort of effectively put in a work registration for some or all of the unclaimed share. So no, it is not a requirement that to access the unmatched that you purchase access to the bulk feed. Heidi asks, could you explain more about the prioritization indicators for unmatched / unclaimed works? Raf, do you want to take that?
Sure, and there was a very similar question by Elisa around how this helps with financial prioritization. So for obvious reasons, we can't publish the financial value associated with the unmatched or the unclaimed work or recordings. What we try to do is to give a best indicator as possible. So we're going to use percentiles. So essentially a number from 1 to 10 or 1 to 100 to let you know in which section category of that work belongs to, if it's a high value work or a not as value work.
Thank you, Raf. What efforts is the MLC taking to make sure data is kept up to date and that any holes in the database are filled? Thank you, Andrew. You've given me the opportunity for a 2-minute plug for the DQI, which I have been plugging for quite some time now, so my apologies to people that have heard this for about 37 times already. So one of the initiatives that the MLC launched earlier in the year is a thing called the DQI, the Data Quality Initiative. And what the DQI is a diagnostic tool that allows a publisher, administrator, CMO, whoever, songwriter that is representing a catalogue of musical works to check that their view of the data that they hold on those musical works matches the MLC's view of the data on the musical works. And if it does not, or where it does not, to get actionable reporting back to tell you where discrepancies exist. So if, for example, Andrew, if you think you represent 75% of a work, and if the MLC's database thinks that you represent 25% of a work, then the DQI will flag that back to you as a discrepancy for you to action. And obviously, it might be that your data, your records are incorrect, and that actually perhaps you are a publisher and there was a songwriter that you used to represent that you don't represent anymore, or it could be that the MLC's data is incorrect, and perhaps you need to send a new work registration, or you need to resolve an overclaim. Again, it's an abstract example, so hard to be specific. So yeah, the DQI, I would say, is by far and away one of the most important facilities that the MLC has made available to members and non-members. So if Andrew, you are a representative of a catalogue of musical works and you are not already participating in the DQI, then I would strongly urge you to do so. And with that, I get off my soapbox.
I was just going to add, so but as Richard said, the DQI is a diagnostic tools, but really your weapon of choice to fix any discrepancies, any holes in the data is really simply to submit a registration. So either via the portal as a member of the MLC, via your CWR registrations. We're also building a bulk work insert tool as part of the portal. So this would be the best way to actually fill those gaps, plug those holes, address any discrepancies really in the data.
Thanks, Raf. Alan and FX ask about, I guess, sort of legally stuff around, I'm just trying to find FX's question. Where's it gone? Oh, the licensing terms, and then sort of Alan asks about terms of service. So let me caveat this answer by saying I am not a lawyer, I am an engineer, so I am giving you my best legal understanding. But if to the extent that you are in any doubt, you should of course take your own legal advice. My understanding is there is no restriction on how you can use the data, but you cannot hold the MLC liable for your use of it. And I'll probably say no more for fear of saying the wrong thing. Oh, and I see Paul also asked the same question. Richard asks, how would the data be transmitted to each user? SFTP. So you will have a each person that wants access, person or organization that wants access to the data will be given an SFTP account, and you will be able to go into that and download the data, or code and configure your systems to go in and download the data. Oops. Let's have a look. Tim asks, will these downloads be a set of files, one per table, for example, or an aggregation of the data in some way? Raf, do you want to?
Sure. So no, it's one file per table, very much mirroring what you would expect in a standard relational database. So there is no aggregation, and the data is supplied as we see it. So, but no transformation along the way.
Thanks, Raf. Paul asks, when a recording is unmatched, is the data source made available? Yes, is the short answer to that. As I said, most of our recording data will be coming in from the digital service providers. That will be indicated alongside the recording data where the data came from. The provenance of the data will be indicated, yes. I think we've answered that one. Sorry, I'm just scrolling through. We're getting quite a few questions. I think we started with 50 questions. We've answered 51, and we still have 44 open. Let me keep going through. And again, Laura, I think Raf just asked your question. It is multiple files representing single tables. Is there an associated schema available? Yes, again, if you check the DDEX documentation, that describes each table in the schema in good detail. Colin asks, will there be a schema export available with files to make importing to another relational database management system easier, or we have to do that ourselves? It's a good question, Colin. Let me take that away. I suppose what I would say is, to the extent that anybody is creating the database schema and sort of control files for uploading, and if anybody is prepared to make those available on an open source basis for their database platform of choice, I think we would be happy to publish those so that other people could take them and use them. That's sort of not quite answering your question, Colin, but as I say, I think we're happy to act as a conduit for if one person wanted to produce it for, say, MySQL, and somebody wanted to do it for Postgres, and somebody wanted to do it for Oracle, and wanted to just make those available as a public service, I think we would be happy to find a way to facilitate that. So Colin, I don't know which RDBMS you use, but if you'd be willing to do that, we'd certainly find a way to help facilitate that.
AKAs around artist name, and I suspect around songwriters' names as well. So there isn't specifically a field for that in the database. The main reason being we're reporting songwriters, we're reporting artists as they want to be credited as far as we know. So if, to give you an example, if Bob Dylan was created on a work, we wouldn't report them as Bob Dylan and Robert Zimmerman. We would simply report him as Bob Dylan because that's how he chose to be credited for his contribution.
I mean, albeit we are obviously reliant there upon the data as supplied to us by his representatives. So, you know, hopefully he has correctly informed his representatives of how he would like to be credited, and then they will in turn pass that data on to us. Forgive me if I pronounce your name incorrectly, but I think it's Consuelo. It says, will there be functionality to download a partial database based on user-defined criteria? No, I'm afraid there won't. You download the database in its entirety, and then you filter it once you've downloaded it and ingested it, and you filter it in whatever way makes sense to you. Mars asks, will the database include all musical works / world repertoire? Are there relevant party / rights holders that withhold information? So whilst I can't definitively answer that question, because I think it very unlikely that the database contains the entire repertoire for the whole world, the MLC is exclusively focused on the United States. So I think it is reasonable to assume, therefore, that the repertoire in the MLC's database will be repertoire that is made available by digital services in the United States, which isn't to say that they won't include some other repertoire, but I certainly would not make the claim that it contained all of the world's repertoire, no. And I doubt there is any single database of musical works on the planet that does. You also ask whether there is anybody withholding information. And again, I can't answer that question definitively, but I can say I don't know of anybody that is withholding information. But that you know, that is sort of knowingly withholding information. But you know, obviously I can't answer that question definitively. So I think, as I say, the MLC is exclusively focused on the United States. So I think, you know, that is likely to be the repertoire that is best represented in the database. There are other questions, but I think we're now moving to questions that aren't really the topic of this webinar, and so not necessarily either my area of expertise or Raphael or Sirona's area of expertise. So having one last look up and down. A late question from Eddie. What would be the publisher cost to access the database? So just to put that back on screen, Eddie, that's the pricing, one-off setup fee of $100, and then if you want ongoing access, $25 a month. But if you are a publisher and if what you want is access to your own repertoire, then that functionality should shortly be made available on the portal. I wonder, yes, we are over time. I wonder then if we should leave it there. Just having one last scan of the questions or anything else that was relevant to bulk feed. I think those, I think hopefully we've answered all of the questions that we can sort of reasonably answer as part of this webinar. So I think we might end the Q&A there if that is okay. Thank you all very much for coming and listening to us and for all of your great questions. Thank you to Raph and Sirona as well for your help and assistance, very much appreciated. And I just, perhaps a final reminder that the expression of interest form, you can find the link to it on that URL there. As I say, it would be really helpful for us if you could just let us know that you're interested so that we can make sure that we are prepared for the number of people that are likely to want to get hold of it. So thank you all very much.
Thanks, everyone.